Okay, let's cover these last couple of slides really quick. So, this is really a repeat of some of the things we said at the very beginning, but it's some of the most important information. And the first bullet is clearly the most important of them all, which means figure out what type of data you're going to be looking for and what data source it lives and where inside that data source does it live. Can't stress enough how important it is to figure that out before you start trying to write an interface against the data source. Then you obviously need the native client tools. If you're working with SQL Server, that's SQL Management Studio. If you're working with a REST API, you're going to need that REST API documentation, and then any client, it could be just the browser, but in some cases the other tools that are important. If it's ODBC or LADB, you will need things like the drivers, and Oracle is particularly finicky about this. You need the exact matching drivers to the data source you're going to get with the same bit depth, etc. So very important.
Yeah, that's important, Robert, because just because the whatever Toad may connect, Oracle's client there may connect, doesn't mean that the standard ODBC data source will connect. So you have to have the correct drivers that will go into the query string to make it work from our tools.
Yep, very important there. And so before you even work with Visual KPI, before you ever do anything, when you're connecting to a data source, as you saw Christian do with the ODBC data source, is he went to the native tools, in that case SQL Management Studio, and wrote a simple query and tested and proved that he could not only connect but could get a piece of data back. Didn't matter what piece of data, it just mattered that he could prove that everything was working before he started working in Visual KPI to create interfaces. And then create the interface, of course, and the security things. I don't think we need to repeat that too much. Anything you'd add there, Christian?
Yeah, once you create the interface, verify the connection, because now you're connecting through our tools, and even though it connected again through whatever client tools they have, you want to make sure definitely the security still goes through, the drivers all work, and everything works connecting through our tools.
Yep.
Obviously, if you can't connect to the native tools, you're in trouble, but once you connect to the native tools, it still needs to work through the drivers that you specified.
Yep.
That actually brings up one common thing that I get phone calls about, and that is, hey, I put a new interface in, I run the verify interface, and it works fine, but I can't get it to connect at runtime. And therein lies the difference between running a desktop application, which would be the GUI for our server manager, that runs under the logged in user context, and that's different than the network service account probably you're using to connect at runtime. So it's important to always test the interface two ways, not just with right-click verify like we should, but also right-click browse. Right-click browse will force that interface to run in the context of IIS instead of the logged-in user in the server manager, and that'll then test the credentials that you're using at runtime.
Yep, and then the last section of this is really what Christian showed you multiple times, which is first write a very simple query with no parameters to just get one current value out and just make sure that that's working, and then build upon it. So take that and then maybe add a parameter, and then once you get that to where you want, then do the trend value and the other queries. Just really going through those steps. And as you get started, especially with your first couple of interfaces, that's something where we're happy to participate with you and help you along the way with those. And as Christian repeated many times, once you've done this a few times, this will be pretty straightforward. You won't need our help going forward unless you run into something really complicated. So here's just a couple of last comments. I think I'll give it over to you, Christian, to cover these, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think we kind of covered it. I don't think we need to talk about this stuff. But really, the bottom one is the big deal. If an interface is slow, you need to start. That's where you can run into problems like, God, this is taking 7 seconds to come back with one value. We have 100 values. That's bad. You have to dig in, why is it taking 7 seconds? Do you have an underperforming database server? Is it improperly indexed, et cetera, et cetera? So that's really, really the key. And then, the one right above that is multiple interfaces versus more parameters, and that's more of a, I guess, almost a religious discussion. What do you like? Do you like a complicated thing that's all encapsulated with one thing with a bunch of parameters, or do you want a bunch of them, a bunch of different interfaces? It just depends on your preference, the customer preference, kind of the standard. Keep it simple. Don't try to overload everything and make one thing do 20 different things.
Yeah. And the first customer that you'll be working with has unlimited interfaces, so you don't need to worry about adding additional interfaces. And I think that kind of wraps it up. So really the main thing is, as you get started, do that homework up front, figuring out where that data lives, figuring out what data source, figuring out all the tools you're going to need. Do as much homework and get as much of that figured out. And then when you get started, if you run into any problems, that's when you contact Transpara. We'll help you through. We'll work alongside you for the first few of these and make sure that all these concepts we showed you today are well understood so that you can go off and write as many of these as you want.